Back in the mid-90s, the economies of East Asia were the envy of the world. They were called the Asian tigers, and they were absolutely roaring with growth. But then, in 1997, a crisis just exploded, seemingly out of nowhere. It completely engulfed these economic superstars and shook the entire global financial system. So how on earth did a decade of incredible success just unravel so fast? Let's get into it.
I mean, just look at this picture from Bangkok in 1997. It really captures the sudden, very human cost of the collapse. People's spending power just vanished, businesses were getting desperate. And it really brings up the central question we're tackling here. How did an economic miracle turn into a total financial nightmare, seemingly overnight?
Okay, so to really understand the crash, we first have to understand the boom. Because before the crisis, the story of East Asia was just one of spectacular, unbelievable success.
And we're not just talking about good numbers here. This was seen as a global blueprint for how to succeed. You had consistent GDP growth, often getting close to double digits. All of it fueled by super high savings, massive investment, and governments that were really friendly to business. For about a decade, it felt like these economies could do no wrong. They were the poster children of globalization.
But that incredible success story was hiding some deep structural problems. The foundations of this so-called miracle, well, they weren't nearly as strong as everyone thought.
All right, so at the heart of the problem was this. Many of these countries had pegged their local currencies to the US dollar. Now, what this did was create a really powerful illusion of stability. If you're a business or a bank, it seems like there's almost no risk in borrowing US dollars because, hey, the exchange rate never changes, right? It felt safe, way too safe.
And this led to a really critical vulnerability called a currency mismatch. So imagine you run a business in Thailand. All your revenue, it's coming in Thai baht. But you've gone out and taken a huge, super cheap loan in US dollars. Now, as long as that exchange rate stays stable, everything's great. But what happens if it doesn't? It's a classic economic trap and one that is, frankly, dangerously timeless. So this is basically the engine that powered the whole crisis. Let's walk through it. First, companies borrow tons of cheap dollars. Then, step 2, something spooks the market, and the local currency, the baht, absolutely plummets. And then bam, step 3. The amount of baht you need to pay back that very same dollar loan just explodes. Your debt might have just doubled or tripled overnight, but your income sure didn't. And that leads directly to step 4, mass defaults and bankruptcy.
So you might be asking, where did all this dollar debt even come from? Well, a huge chunk of it wasn't stable long-term investment. A full 50% of it was what economists call hot money. Short-term loans and investments that could be yanked out at the very first sign of trouble. It was nervous money, fueling a boom that was living on borrowed time. And that kind of funding is always the first to run for the exit.
All this cheap, easy credit had to go somewhere, right? It just poured into the domestic economies, creating these massive asset bubbles. Property values in cities like Bangkok and Jakarta went through the roof, and the stock markets hit these dizzying heights. But it was all built on a giant mountain of fragile, short-term foreign currency debt.
Every fire needs a spark. You had all this hidden fuel, this risk just sitting there across the whole region. But the match was lit in one country, Thailand.
For months, speculators had been betting that Thailand couldn't keep its currency peg. The government spent billions of its foreign reserves trying to defend it. But on July 2nd, 1997, the dam broke. The reserves were gone, and Thailand was forced to float the baht. It collapsed almost immediately. That was the moment the world's perception flipped from stable to fragile.
And what started as a problem in Thailand did not stay a problem in Thailand. The fire jumped across borders with terrifying speed, creating a regional and then global financial storm.
So here's the crucial part. International investors looked at what happened in Thailand, and they had this sudden, terrifying realization that other countries in the region had the exact same problems. The currency pegs, the hot money, the asset bubbles. A complete crisis of confidence just swept through the markets. They didn't just pull their money out of Thailand. They started pulling it out of everywhere that looked even remotely similar. The dominoes fell with terrifying speed. After Thailand, the panic spread to Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. It even reached all the way to South Korea, a much bigger, more developed economy, which was suddenly pushed to the very brink of default.
The scale of this collapse was so immense that the international community, led by the IMF, had to mobilize a staggering $118 billion in bailout packages. And that was just to stop the bleeding. At the time, it was one of the largest financial rescues in history.
The crisis was eventually contained, but the recovery was long and incredibly painful. And it left behind some crucial lessons about the global financial system that are just as relevant today as they were back then. And the medicine was tough to swallow. To get that bailout money, these countries had to implement some really painful policies. They had to jack up interest rates to stabilize their currencies, which absolutely crushed local businesses. They had to enact austerity measures to pay for cleaning up the banks. Now, in the short term, these policies often made the recessions even deeper, but they were seen as necessary to fix the underlying weaknesses in their financial system.
Look, if you take just one thing away from this whole story, let it be this. This is the timeless warning from 1997. A country can look incredibly strong on the surface, but if its growth is funded by fragile foreign currency debt and there isn't strong oversight, well, that growth is basically sitting on a trap door, just waiting for confidence to disappear.
And that brings us to today. The global financial system is different now, for sure. Many countries have more flexible exchange rates and way bigger foreign reserves. But the core vulnerabilities? They can still reappear. Whenever you see a strong US dollar combined with high corporate debt in foreign currencies, and you see asset booms being financed by short-term funding, you are seeing the ghost of 1997. The names and the places might change, but the mechanics of a crisis remain dangerously the same.